Hello, welcome to paintinglessonsonline.com. In this video I'm going to show you how to create a still life from fruit that you have at home. So please go ahead and pick out an apple, an orange, or a cherry. Set it up in front of your space and we'll get started making a beautiful still life like this. Every painting starts with a drawing. When you start your first drawing, you want to just take the largest shapes and draw those first. So the largest shape is the orange, and you want to think, okay, what does this look like? You want to really take a hard look at it and say, this is mostly a circle, slightly elongated on the sides. So we're going to draw a circle. And then we're going to slightly elongate the sides. Just add a little bit here, add a little bit there. So just go for circle. That's all. That's all you need to put. And then we've got a smaller circle, the cherry, and it is below and to the right of the larger circle. So we want to try to get it about the right size proportionately to this. So it looks like it's about that big. And then we've got the stem that rests on the orange. It comes up pretty high in the orange. Now that we have our large main shape and our smaller shape, we want to draw the shadows, which are these shapes but elongated into ellipses. So for the cherry, I'm just going to draw an ellipse, and for the orange, I'm going to draw a bigger ellipse. Now I'm copying the angle that I see here on the table for both of these, and the center, or the very edge of the ellipse, is at the very point where the object touches the table. So mine is here, this one should be like about here. So there we go. We've got ellipses in diagonals for shadows. And that's all you need to do for the drawing. Now we can start painting. The colors you will need for this painting are black, white, green, yellow, orange, and red. We'll start with the biggest shape, which is the orange. So we're going to take some of our orange and some of our yellow and mix a pile of the lighter color. Mix even more yellow with some white. So what I'm doing is I'm mixing several colors that we're going to be using in this painting. Mixing a whole bunch of piles so that I don't have to do it later. So I can just take from the colors that I've mixed. So this is probably enough tones for the orange. And then we'll need the shadowed orange part, which is going to have just a tiny bit of black into it. Okay. So for our painting, I'll start on this side and move to the right. Now we're looking at the colors. Also we're looking at the light. And we're trying to transition as the light transitions. So the beginning is kind of a light yellow with a little bit of white mixed in. And then we've got our light orange. Now the orange I mixed was didn't have enough yellow in it, so I just pulled it out and I picked up a little bit of this light yellow, mixing a color in between for the next part of the orange. Then I can use brighter orange. It's got less white in it. And I'm moving in circles so that it will give the illusion of the round shape. So And now I'm using basically just the orange color. As far as brush strokes go, it doesn't really matter right now. We're just laying the paint on the canvas. We'll do some blending as soon as we've put all the color on for the orange. And then we've got the background color, or the shadow on the orange. And then I'm going to just add some bright orange, maybe a tiny bit of red. No, just orange. Just really bright, so I'm going to add yellow and red to it, make it even brighter. Right along the edge. So it's very dark, but it's got more of the orange tone to it. Okay. So that's just us laying down the paint. Now we'll blend it together. You want to take a dry brush, maybe a little bit bigger size, and just kind of smooth it out. Push it around, push the paint so that it blends. And you can do it a whole bunch of different ways. I like to start and blending, and I blend it where the colors meet. So where this orange, yellow-orange meets the orange-orange. So just kind of along there, and then I move out. Then now I'm doing the line where the lighter meets the darker orange. I'm blending it. Short little strokes like this kind of replicate the texture of an orange as well. Now I don't go back over here because now I've got dark orange on my brush. Once I've moved out, I keep going, just so that it blends like that. So now this is close, but it's not really what's there. We need to make some adjustments in the colors. So I feel like our orange has got a lot more yellow going on in this area. It's a lot brighter. So I'm going to mix that. I'm going to take some yellow and some of the orange, maybe bright orange, just a little bit though. It's mostly the yellow. A teeny bit of white, just to lighten it up. So that's pretty much the same color. I'm going to need more yellow and more white to lighten it up. There we go. So that color right there is more of what we're looking for the brightest part of the orange. And we can push that out to the other parts. I'm going to blend it in as well. And I'm working in a circle. See how I'm pushing it back this way? Because I'm trying to copy the form. This is the highlight of the orange, and it's pretty bright. So we're going to make ourselves a really light color. Stick that right there. And brush it out, blend it in with the darker orange. Like that. We're gonna blend it so that it doesn't look like it's fake. So we're just kind of like spotty blending, kind of like that. Now it looks like we have an orange ball, which is good. We're gonna make an even lighter color. Put it there for the highlights. Okay. Now we can move on to the cherry. We'll mix those colors. The cherry's got some plain red. I just used the wet brush from before, So the red had a little bit of yellow and white in there, so it's a little bit lighter. Then we'll have just a straight color, doesn't have anything to blend into it. And then we'll have the dark red, which is where it's casted, or it casts in shadow. Okay. And this time, just for the fun of it, we'll go the opposite direction. So we'll start with the dark shadow. Okay. Then we're going to wipe off our brush. And we're going to get that pure red color. Put that in there. And then we're going to go for our lighter red. And that cherry doesn't need much else. I mean, I think that the background could be a little bit darker, so maybe add a little bit more black to our dark red, just to emphasize that shadow. I also think the orange needs a little bit more shadow, so we're going to take our darkest orange, going to add some red to it, a little bit of black, more yellow, just darken it up with some more black. And up here is the darkest part of the orange's shadow. So I'm just going to add that in. And then I kind of bring it down to this part of the orange as well. There we go. So now we have the basic form of the orange and cherry. Now we can do the shadow. So for the shadow, we're going to, since it's on a white table, we're going to have just a gray shadow. Very simple gray. Just take a little bit of black, mostly white, and fill in the shadow. Now, you're painting wet on wet right now, so if you touch the other colors with your brush, they're going to mix into your gray. It's okay if you get it a little bit here and there. It's fine. It'll warm up the gray, make it more like the rest of the painting and get those same tones. Just do the same with this cherry. And there we are, we have the shadows and we have the forms. Now we're going to let it dry because we want to be able to paint the green stem and also the background colors, or the background color. And if we did that right now, on the wet on wet, it would start blending and we don't want that. So go ahead and let this dry for about 2 days. Now that we've let the canvas dry for 2 days, you can touch it. If no paint comes off, it's good to go. You can unwrap your paints. Now we are going to mix the colors for the cherry stem. It's just going to be mostly green with a little tiny bit of black and yellow. To be able to create a very thin paint stroke like this, you've got to be able to control the paint. And so what you have to do is you have to roll the paintbrush so that it's evenly coated with paint, but that there's not too much on there. If you have too much paint on your brush, it's going to glob onto the canvas and make a very thick line. And for this part, we're looking to make the thinnest line possible. So we roll the brush like this, just to evenly coat it in paint. And then when we go to paint our cherry stem, you rest your hand on the canvas for support, and then you slowly pull the brush stroke across like this. Now I didn't have enough paint right there, so I'm going to pick up some more, roll the brush in it, and then I'm going to pull the paint brush across the canvas. You don't want to push it down because it's not going to create the thinnest line possible. The bristles are going to spread out and it's going to make a thicker line. So you want to pull it so that they stay together. The brush cannot hold that much paint because it's so small, so you have to keep reapplying the amount of paint that you want. But as long as you rest your hand on the canvas and you slowly pull the paintbrush across, you'll get a nice thin line. Every object in a painting needs to have a highlight, a midtone, and a shadow. For our cherry stem, we're going to add the highlight at the base and drag it up the left side of the stem. Now this is a light green that I'm applying. Like that. We're not going to do the entire length of the stem because this is just where the light is catching, and that's going to give it some interest. We're also going to put a highlight at the very end and make the end just a little bit wider than the rest of the stem. Now that the cherry stem has a highlight and a midtone, it also needs a shadow. So I'm applying dark green on the right side. Now for the background, I'm going to keep the table white as we see it here, so that it's got this nice gray shadow. So you have to paint, you want to use actual paint to do that. Just fill it in. And when you're painting the background, it's kind of like an eraser. You can shape the object with the background image. So I made the cherry a little bit too wide. So what I'm going to do as I'm painting in the background is I'm going to cover parts of the cherry that shouldn't be there. So I'm going to come up right against the shadow and very slowly and cautiously I'm going to paint around the cherry. And around the shadow. Just like that. From your perspective, the table goes all the way up to here above the orange. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the top of the table go right here to the top of the shadow. So I'm even going to draw a line just so we know where the top of our table ends. And that's going to give it a little bit more three-dimensionality as well. Just like that. And I'm going to paint the table all the way up to that line. I'm being very cautious when I'm painting right next to the orange. And I'm kind of rounding the orange out even more. Now, depending on how much paint you use, you can create an interesting texture with your paint by applying a thick amount on there, which will give the painting a little bit more interest if you have a thick texture. Or if you like a thinly painted version, that's fine as well. So here I'm being very careful when I'm painting around the shadow Need some more white. The reason that we let it dry is because when we're painting this background color, we don't want it to mix with the color of the cherry and the color of the shadows. We want to be able to cover those other colors so that we can kind of perfect the shape that they're in. Alright, so there's some detail points that I can't paint with this brush because it's too big. So I'm going to switch to a smaller brush so I can have more control. When I'm very close to the orange and the shadow. And then this side of the cherry, I want to make this side a little bit shorter. It's too wide in my opinion. So I'm going to come up to it and just cover part of that dark red. Just like that. There we are. The cherry is a little bit not quite as wide as before. I still think it's a little too wide. So I'm going to come over here and give it a different shape on this side as well. There we go. That looks pretty good. Now for the background color, up here, you can choose any color you like. I really like teal, so I'm going to go ahead and make that color. I'm going to add a little bit of blue and green together to create it. So we'll use the same brush as before. We got some white on my brush with some light or with some blue and a bit of green. Paint it in. You can choose any color you like, whatever you find is your favorite or that you think would complement the orange and the red. I'm going to need to mix more of it, so I'm going to get more white, more blue, more green, and mix them together. Maybe a touch more green. I'm going to look at the color, see if that's the one I like, then I can apply. You can have some fun with the background too. If you want to add a couple of variations of color. When painting in the background color, you can add a darker version of the color next to the highlight part of the orange to give it contrast. Paintings with high contrast, where the lights and the darks touch, are more interesting to look at. So you can just kind of blend that dark in there. You can also add some of the darker background color next to the white table to have more contrast. And then blend it back in. Now for the details on the fruit. The cherry you see has a highlight on there, and so does the orange. But they have two different types of highlights. The cherry's got a very white highlight and a softer, smaller highlight to the right. whereas the orange has got a whole bunch of little white dots because of the texture of the fruit. So I'm going to use a very small brush again. And for the cherry, I'm just going to use pure white. I'm going to look at the shape of this highlight. It's kind of like a oval that is longer, taller than it is wide. So I'm going to paint a very small shape like that, that is taller than it is wide. And then another small one right there. And for the orange, brighten up some of the areas. Make them more bold. Add more orange colors to the orange to give it more interest. So in the transition between the orange and the shadow, I'm going to have a more vibrant color. Right in between the shadow. Painting around the stem. And I'm also going to have that vibrant orange right out of the tube at the very end of the orange. I'm adding yellow to it so that it lightens it up. I'm going to put that color pretty close right next to it. It's very hard to see right here, but there's a little tiny bit of the orange's light reflecting onto the white table. If you want to add that in, that could be a fun little play of the light, just by mixing that orange color in with the wet white on the table. So it's kind of like an opposite of a shadow. It's the light bouncing off of the orange onto the table. Now I'm going to lighten my orange up even more. Take my white, my orange, and my yellow. Make a very bright color. Let's give that to the orange as well. Spread that around. Now we can do the dots. So I'm going to use that light orange color that I just made and put it on the darker orange so that there's contrast. Now all these little dots are going to give it the texture that you see on the orange. Small dots randomly dispersed. You don't want to put them in a line. If anything, you want to put them at diagonals. So now I've got that light orange fading out, and I'm going to go back to the darker orange, the more vibrant orange, and I'm going to overlap that onto some of this lighter orange over here. And then I'm going to go for that very, very dark orange right out of the tube. I'm going to layer a little bit of that on there as well. For here, this area, it needs more texture. I'm going to go back to the light orange. Since it's so dark, I just want to layer on a noticeably different hue of orange so that you can see the variation in color. I've got the really bright orange. I can come over here where the shadow is and do some dots over there, give that some texture. See, I'm kind of going in diagonals. 1, 2, 1, 2, kind of like that, following the circle form. And use my bright orange to touch up any areas where I may have accidentally painted on top of it. There we go. Then for the very background, or for the shadowed area, can mix that dark orange again. Very dark orange color. And with my small brush, which I am rolling every time I pick up paint on the brush, give it those little dots of texture. Do it over here too. Alright, there we go. Now we've got a textured orange. Now it's looks a little even to me. Like, it doesn't look very realistic because of the way that the highlights are spread out. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to give them even more dots and more variation, just so that it doesn't look as even. And I'm just kind of picking up my brush and plopping it down, doing a lot of brush strokes. The key is repetition, to do more and more and more, and eventually the pattern will build up and look like nature. Because nature is basically the same shape repeated over and over again. The leaves on a tree or on a bush. The petals on a flower, waves in water, clouds in the sky, they're all the same exact lines repeated over and over and over again. You just have to figure out what that pattern is and then do it over and over again with your brush. And that's how you're going to be able to reproduce natural objects. So now I'm putting some of the darker orange, the medium orange, in the center. So that it's got some more texture going on there. I'm painting this very quickly. This is going to take you a little bit longer to do, but that's okay. That's what it's all about. My first paintings, when I started, took me up to 30 hours for a single painting. And this video here is showing you how to paint it in about 30 minutes. So if it takes you longer than that, that's how it works. Now I'm just stippling all over this orange, just giving it a ton of texture, keeping them really small and randomly dispersing. If there's parts that don't look very natural, just go over them again. That's what painting is. It's a layering process. What you want to do is you want to keep the parts that you like and paint over the parts that you don't like. And you just repeat that process until there's nothing left to paint over. Alright, so I feel like the orange is looking pretty realistic. Maybe I want a little bit of a brighter orange here. Adding more orange to the bottom of it so it's appearing to be round. And then I'm kind of outlining the orange a little bit with this bright orange color so that it pops. If you're getting confused, it's helpful to stand back. Stand away from your painting and view it from afar, and then you'll be able to see the object and you'll see that you're making progress towards creating an illusion of reality. Now, for the cherry, this cherry has gotten pretty dark because it's a couple days old, but I want to have a very bright cherry. So I'm going to go ahead and put some vibrant red right on there. I'm even going to give a little bit of that red reflection on the table. Very subtle. I feel like there's even a little bit too much, so I'm going to take a rag, just wipe it away so that it's very subtle. Make the edges crisp. And then I'm going to blend in this highlight a little bit. So with my small brush, I'm going to take the red, add a little bit of white to it to lighten it up, and I'm going to work around the highlight just so it blends it in a little bit. Maybe give it another small highlight up here. And a little highlight in the back. The light reflecting off of the table. Alright. I'm going to go ahead and take this brush and just blend in all of these little dots. All I'm doing is basically patting the brush to the orange. And this is kind of blurring all of those little strokes that I did and making them fade into the orange so that they don't stick out as much. Basically softening all those little edges that I created. Now I'm going to critically look at my still life versus my painting and ask myself, what am I missing? What do I need to add? The last thing to do is to sign your painting. So you want to, again, take one of the smallest brushes that you have. Choose the color that you want to sign the painting in. I'm going to go ahead and do it in red, just because our cherry is red. You can traditionally do black, or you can choose a color that's in the painting. And your signature depends. I don't recommend cursive. Cursive is very challenging to paint. You can either do your initials, your first name, your last name, or both. I like to sign my paintings with Jess. So I've practiced my signature several times, so now I've got it down. You may want to practice your signature on something else first, just to make sure you like the look of it. Try a couple variations and see what you like, and then go ahead and paint it on your canvas. So I'm twisting my brush every time I pick up paint so that I can have the most control. I'm also letting my hand rest on the easel so that my hand isn't shaking. Alright, there we go. Thank you for joining us here at paintinglessonsonline.com. I hope you enjoyed learning how to paint a still life in oil, and I encourage you to watch our other videos to learn more advanced techniques in oil painting. Have a nice day.